I'm Christina Clancy. I'm the author of The Second Home. I'm going to read a very short section from the first chapter of the book, and then I'll talk about why I wrote it. So in this scene, Michael is a teenager from Milwaukee and he's visiting Cape Cod with the Gordon family for the first time. There are two sisters in the family, Poppy and Ann, and they've taken him to the ocean and they don't know that he doesn't know how to swim. Michael raced down the dune behind the girls, so intent on staying steady in the deep, rust-colored sand that he didn't look up or ahead as he followed the winding tracks around beach blankets, frisbee players, coolers, sandcastles, and the lifeguard stand. They stopped just short of the surf. Michael stood next to Anne and stared in awe at the limitless expanse of blue sky and churning gray water spread out in front of him. His lungs and legs burned. He'd seen Lake Michigan plenty of times. The lake was just a puddle compared to the Atlantic. The ocean was as frightening as it was beautiful. He felt as if he were standing at the mouth of a massive and hungry living thing. Poppy squealed with delight when a wave broke against her leg. She was always in her own world, daydreaming and doodling palm trees on her folders and the textbook covers she made out of old grocery bags and Scotch tape. She changed when she got near the water. It was as if he could see her snap into herself, become her own person. It's even colder than I remembered. Poppy's smile was broad. Her shoulders glistened and the thick rope of her braid hung over one bare shoulder. He'd always been so preoccupied with Anne that he felt as if he were only now seeing Poppy. Her looks were more rugged and outdoorsy than Anne's. Poppy didn't seem like she'd just arrived at the beach. It was as if she'd been standing there all along. "Put your foot in, Michael." The girls watched Michael expectantly as he took in the rise, curl, and crash of waves against the shore. He couldn't move. He was overwhelmed by both the power of the surf and the girls' intense focus on him. He began to feel there was something pressingly selfish about their interest, as though they didn't really care if he connected to Cape Cod. What they wanted was for him to recognize their attachment to the place. "Come on," Poppy said in her dreamy voice, splashing the water like a dancer. "It's amazing." "It's cold at first," Anne said, "but you'll get used to it." He didn't know what to do. He couldn't shake his fear that the Gordons could still change their mind about him. During the drive out, he was convinced they'd leave him stranded at a gas station or rest stop. He couldn't believe they'd asked him to come along to this place Ed called the Outermost Cape. Outermost was right. It seemed about as different and as far away as he could possibly get from Milwaukee. He thought he'd known what to expect. Poppy and Anne had shown him their scrapbook stuffed with pictures of Wellfleet. The photos made the place seem quiet and peaceful, and he looked forward to going there the way his mother had talked about going to heaven. He hadn't anticipated the wind ripping in his ears, the ocean roaring like a freight train, and the girls staring at him. "Don't you want to swim?" Poppy asked. It was as if she thought the ocean could change him, and she was right. It could. The ocean could change him from hot to cold, change the air in his lungs to water, change him from living to dead. Michael looked down at his feet to anchor himself, but got dizzy watching the small pebbles crash against each other, roll forward, skitter back, forward, back. They were powerless, grinding down to nothing against each other. The air tasted like salt. Gulls swirled overhead and the wind ripped at his hair. Children misbehaved and their parents in plaid swim trunks and polo shirts scolded them in their strange East Coast accents. "Daniel, I told you not to put sand in your brother's eyes. And where's your noodle?" They were the kind of people who belonged here. People who set summers aside from the rest of the year. People who had money and families, who knew how to swim and thought nothing of it. People who thought this beach was relaxing. So I wrote this book ostensibly because I was intrigued by a woman I met when I was in Panama about a decade ago. She was a surfer and a bartender, and she said she never went home. So I wanted to write about someone who never went home and find a way to get her home. But for me, home is always complicated because there's the home I grew up in, but my grandparents had retired to a house in Cape Cod that's been in my family since the 1890s, and that also felt like home to me. So I decided to make it a more complicated home for Poppy as well, and the other siblings. But it's also about what happens when your parents die, and how siblings have to decide what their new family is going to look like without the parents in the picture anymore, and whether they want to stay a family. So this is a book really about these siblings kind of reconciling what happened in the past and also deciding what the future is going to look like.